So today I'm going to show you how to put together a really basic pivot table to help you quickly analyze and summarize your data. So pivot tables can be really helpful when you have a giant data set, but you want to see certain trends or averages based on some of the data that might be in there. So I'm going to show you first with Excel how to do this, and then in Google Sheets. SOAR is a good example of a data set that might be helpful to apply pivot tables to. Because what you have here is you have all these fictitious students with fake teachers here. You have all this data here, which is great on the individual level, but you might want to zoom out and say, like, okay, what does this look like on the student group level or on the teacher level? And that's where a pivot table comes in. Now, before we dive in, I do want to say that with pivot tables, it's helpful to have nice, clean data. You want to make sure there's just like one row with the headers. You don't have merged things. Sometimes you might see like maybe this says like NC check-in and it's merged across here. Pivot table is going to be a little bit kind of confused. It's going to take some tinkering to get it to work right. You really just want nice and simple, one row with clear headers. Thankfully with SOAR, which is available to Wake County teachers, it's going to spit out a spreadsheet for you that is going to pair very nicely with pivot tables. Okay, so to work on this, let's do highlight everything, click in this corner, insert pivot table from table and range. You could pick and choose which columns you want, but we're going to be able to do that later with the field. So for now, I'll just do everything, move it to its own worksheet so that we have plenty of space. Okay, and now we start building the table. So the rows, that's what I want to maybe break things down by. So let's do maybe the teacher name. So here, we're not showing actual teacher names. These are employees within DRA. And then the values is the thing that we might want to summarize. So for this, why don't we do NC check-in? So I'll move A and B right over there. And you can see that it's starting to work, but what it's doing right now is coming up with the sum of all the NC check-in percent corrects, which isn't that helpful. So instead, if we click on value field settings and then do average, and do this for each, now what we have is really quickly, we're able to zoom out and see for each teacher what was that overall percent correct for NC check-in A and B. So going from here, where you're seeing all that student level data, to here, that allows you to kind of maybe more quickly get a sense of what's going on. And you can make them, these can get really complex. We're going to keep it pretty basic, but here I'll just show you maybe what you want to do is also break that down by, let's say, student group. So here now you have for each of these fake teachers, just based on that student group what the averages were, and you can kind of collapse or shrink it down by hitting these kind of plus signs there. So yeah, you can see how that might be helpful to when you have a giant data set to quickly zoom out and look at certain averages. One other thing I'll show you just really quick before we move to Google Sheets. I'm going to simplify this a little bit, just do that percent correct. When you're in this pivot table, if you want to start thinking about how to visualize it, there's this pivot table analyze and then pivot chart. And then it can give you some ways to just quickly build charts from that. So with just a couple clicks, you can go from some 1,000 row spreadsheet with individual data to think about how it can be divided up by group, and then visualize it with that pivot chart. So that's in Excel. As is often the case, Google Sheet is going to be pretty similar. It's just sometimes things are kind of placed in a different spot. So for here, let's highlight everything. Let's do insert and let's do pivot table. We'll move this to its own sheet like we did before. And it looks slightly different, but it's the same basic idea. So rows, this is, maybe we'll switch it up instead of doing the teacher for this. Maybe we'll look at it by that student group. So we have the student groups here. And then the values for this, why don't we do absences the current year? So now you have those total absences for each of those groups. You're able to kind of zoom out. And something else that's neat is you can kind of play around and you can go really deep with pivot tables. We're going to keep it mostly surface level for now. But for instance, maybe let's switch this to, instead of just showing the sum, the total, how about percent of the column? So now you have, of all the absences, what is the percent for each of those student groups here? And same thing before, if you want to add, like maybe we'll also look at, I don't know, student survey, teacher-student relationship. So this was, as a reminder, saying in our student survey, all the questions that would fall under the domain of how a student feels about the relationship with their teachers, percent that they would agree with that. So this is giving a sum, so let's change this to average. And now we're looking at, for those student groups, percent that agreed with those comments and percent that had positive responses for those. You'll notice there's some kind of broken formulas here that would just be in the data. Not every student we had student survey data on. So some it's trying to divide by 0. So that's what that kind of code is right there. You don't have with Google Sheets, and actually here, I'll just show one more thing. You can also do the same kind of breakdown group where let's say, okay, and maybe we also drill down by, let's say, grade level. So now you have the student group and then broken down the percent of averages for something like this. Maybe we switch it back to the default of, how many absences they have. Since smaller group, that's why I want to just do the raw number by grade. So for this group, how many absences in 6th, 7th, and 8th. So same thing, you can kind of break it down or up by kind of adding multiple rows there. So there isn't like a pivot chart in the same way that you have with Excel, but you can add a chart quickly just like you would anything else by highlighting, doing insert chart, and then just kind of tweaking it however you'd like from there. Same basic idea. So yeah, pivot tables, when you have a large data set and you want to zoom out and try to analyze it based on some of the data that you might have, like student group or teacher or grade, whatever it might be, that's where a pivot table can help you to kind of come up with this, some of those averages and be able to analyze it in that manner. I hope that was helpful. If you can dig a lot deeper with pivot tables, slicing it and filtering it, all those kind of things. Feel free to research that on your own, or if you're within Wake County, contact us and we can help you to use pivot tables to better understand and act on your data. Hope that was helpful.